Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash. Double honors, the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, who are teaching this truth in sincerity. And shout out to the Akims out there in the four quarters of the earth proclaim this truth. Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash, Brakatum. So we're near the end of a month, pretty much. This is the last day of the month. And we're going into another month, right? And what's going on? Well, as you probably heard it, here at Great Millstone, Bill C-9 was just passed. So it goes into effect about a month from now, which Bill C-9 means that, pretty much that the Bible has been outlawed. That it could be considered hate speech if you're using any Bible references, especially dealing with the alphabet group, right? Because that Fag Month was actually celebrated, was commemorated here in the U.S., but this is a bill that's in Canada, but eventually will make its way over here. Nonetheless, though, it's a famine of the word, and that's definitely a huge update, Like everything else, though, the Most High said that there would be a famine in the land, which would mean that you would not hear the words of Yahweh Shai anymore. We wouldn't be out there teaching it anymore because simply it'd be outlawed, it'd be banned. Well, they've had that for quite some time. Even during the Obama administration, he wanted to get rid of it because he was part of the alphabet community too. So like everything else, so now that never happened, but they spoke of it, right? Because it goes against that faggot shit, which like everything else, though, homosexual marriages were recognized in a few states, and eventually it became nationwide, like everything else, though, this is the place of Sodom and Egypt, where our power was crucified, meaning that we didn't know who we were. We were raised Babylonian. We were raised, a lot of us thought we were Edomites, right? But we weren't called Edomites. White people. We thought we were so-called white, but yet we just didn't fit in with them, right? The racist jokes, etc. We just didn't fit in. Just a lot of us didn't fit in with it. We didn't think that way. Well, there's a reason for it, right? Because we would later find out who we really truly were, right? But this is the place where our power was crucified, right? Because we were taught JC, which has nothing to do with Yahweh Shai. See, that's not even his name. But once you know his name, and then you go start teaching it in a different name, once you've officially done that, you are guilty of blaspheming his name. And as you know, those that are still teaching the name JC, but yet they have the actual name, leaders, which without saying who it is, we'll have to answer to that because you're teaching in a different name. You took a bribe and you're going to be held accountable. The Most High is going to put you to death for that, because like everything else, though, and the only reason why he hasn't yet, because he said that he would send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie, right? Because they can't even make up their mind on what the MOTB is. They tell you that they always have something new for the MOTB almost every year. They come up with a new breakdown on it, but yet none of it makes any sense, because this is going to be mandated worldwide, which is going to be in your hand or in your forehead. They don't even go into that detail, about it being implanted in you. No, they leave out that part too, saying that, sin is the mark, or, they have some other really twisted versions of it, right? But we've all sinned and fallen short. We still sin and fall short, so that's not it. You can repent of sins. People do it all the time. Our people do it all the time. That's what we're doing. That's why we pray we're part of that hopeful elect. We say hopeful elect because we don't know until that time comes whether we were saved or not. You see, like everything else, though, the true revival is going to be those that go up on them ships, them chariots. And like everything else, though, this C-9 bill, though, is just proving that, okay, we're almost done. That it's just a matter of time until, the Most High removes all of us off the streets. And that is by way of the laws. See, like everything else, though, he's going to shut up the words, because like everything else, though, there was a time period. And that time period is just about up. The grace period is just about up. And with the Esau especially fails to admit, as well as everybody else that's joined on to Esau fails to admit, is that their leader has failed them. But yet shameful spewing is upon those that really truly see him for what he is. That all politicians are alike, but this one in particularly takes the Donald, right? Of course I'm talking about Nero 47. He said no new wars, right? You know, kind of like George Herbert Walker Bush, if you remember, when he ran, you know, after the Reagan administration, he ran and says, "Read my lips, no new taxes." What did he do? He taxed everybody. And he went to war, you know. He immediately started a war, you know, with Iraq, you know, under the guise of Saddam Hussein took Kuwait, which, if you know anything about that invasion, you know that they were deliberately set up. You see, like everything else, though, the UN said that Iraq could have Kuwait, and then they used it as a pretext to go after Iraq. Because King Bibi said that, well, in order to go after Iran, we would have to gain control of those countries. And there were 7 countries that they wanted to go into. You know, fast forward, you know, into the 2000s, right, that there was 7 countries they wanted to go into, but they wanted to leave Iran last. You know, they didn't tell you about Turkey, you know, because that was still on the list, but Yemen was on the list, Syria, Libya. But like everything else, though, there's a new sheriff coming in town, right? There's a new broker that'll be coming very shortly, because the U.S. has admitted that their bases were destroyed and that they're only going to, you know, relocate those bases into the Israeli state, because, you know, even though Israeli state already had everything, they still couldn't defend against Iran's retaliatory strikes, you know, and so all their resources are going to be sent to the Israeli state, you know, to defend the Israeli state, which is not really defending, because the Israeli state is the one on the offensive, you know. Nobody has launched any attacks against the Israeli state that the Israeli state didn't start. But, you know, these Edomites and just basically the proud, which referring to the Edomites, man, they won't admit that their leader has failed them. Even though it's blatant that he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit about anyone because he doesn't think about anyone. He's only with the 1%, you know, and he considers themselves above all others, right? And that everybody else, and he won't even acknowledge you as a peasant. You know, but pretty much, though, he doesn't care. And he's blatantly said it. But like everything else, though, this is what he really said. And, you know, everybody is looking at it. It's like, yeah, you promised all this shit. You're a liar. Just like all politicians are. But this one takes the Donald.
Donald Trump, a lot of people voted for him because he was anti-war.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people here thought he was anti-war. I thought he was going to be anti-war because he was the only president who didn't start a war in his first term in my lifetime.
But he did. He launched a war against Syria.
So he came to stop wars. No more wars. No more disruptions. We will have prosperity and we will have peace. Under Trump, we will have no more wars, no more disruptions, and we will have prosperity and peace for all. I am the candidate of peace. I am peace. We will turn the page forever on those foolish, stupid days. Never-ending wars. They never ended.
You insisted no more wars.
So he said no wars, and then here we go.
What changed? Because you insisted no more wars.
First of all, I didn't guarantee no war.
Yeah, he's laughing at you. Because you were stupid enough to vote him in again.
Guarantee it. He only promised it. All I did was promise it over and over and over. That's not a guarantee. There's no legal obligation. A guarantee comes with legal obligation. A promise people break all the time. There's a legal distinction. That's pretty awesome that he did it.
What changed? Because you insisted no more wars.
First of all, I didn't guarantee no war. Okay. What changed actually, well, I think he bought 10,000 shares of Palantir. I think that's what changed.
Yeah.
Is that what changed?
Exactly. You know, like everything else, though, he's bought and paid for. All these politicians are bought and paid for. You know, if you haven't guessed, the Israeli state's who runs and controls America, right? You know, that these bankers are the ones that control everything. So King Bibi has more rule than Donald Trump does. And this fake dispute between King Bibi and Donald Trump is hilarious because there are people that still believe that Donald Trump and King Bibi ain't getting along. When really, truly, though, they're just pretending to be at odds because they're planning to launch a huge-scale attack against Iran using bigger weapons. Possibly nuclear weapons, because Chris Green was going into it. And then you heard from the Israelis themselves talking about, well, Israel hasn't unleashed their ultimate weapon, which is the Samson option. You know, they figured that they're cornered, they're about to be taken out soon, so they're just going to launch a nuclear war. They're going to start a nuclear war. And guess what? The U.S. is on that list too, because, well, you know, you're not doing the bidding of the Israeli state. So therefore, they're going to take you out. And they have no problems doing it. They kill women and children. They go after girls' schools, you know, because, hey, Donald Trump is Amalek as well. You know, and they bombed a girls' school and he said it was just for fun. You know, he bragged about how fun it was, and then he blew up a bridge in Iran. You know, because like everything else, so it's really about going after infrastructure and punishing the people. And about going after military targets, because you couldn't hit their military targets anyways. They can hit yours, you know, because they got both Russian and Chinese intelligence, you know, so they know where to hit. Iran knows how to respond. The weak are strong. And of course, Babylon the Great is being cut asunder, you know. So how the hammer of the whole earth is being broken down? Well, you're seeing it. You're seeing the downfall of Babylon the Great. So there ain't much left, you know, so they're going to go all out. And that's why Bill C-9 was already passed in Canada, which is part of North America. And you've already heard Trump declare that Canada, he was going to make it a state anyways. So you see that what goes on in Canada really is going to happen over here, you know. And the same thing with Greenland. He said that he would make Greenland a state, that the U.S. should take Greenland, as well as taking over Cuba. And you already see that they've used direct energy weapons against Venezuela, and they still haven't even determined the full death toll on the earthquake, because they haven't found all the missing people. But direct energy weapons, which both the Israeli state and the U.S. brag about having, although they don't directly call it that, but yet they say that we went in, we got Maduro by the likes of means nobody has ever seen before, you know. So like everything else, though, the likes and means of what nobody has ever seen before, right? You know, and yet before Bashar al-Assad fell, both Turkey and Syria had a major earthquake. You know, that's not a coincidence, you know, that they had one of the, because this is an earthquakes in diverse places. Yes, the Most High sends the sword after everyone. You see, Matthew 24, it's happening. Earthquakes in diverse places, right? Places by the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. You see, the Most High, Yahweh, is mad. So he's sending Yahweh Shai to destroy. He's visiting. He's visiting. He's destroying. You know, because that is the destroying one. Yahweh Shai and the angels, you know, are going to stir up the Medes and the Persians to fight against Babylon. And that's what's happening. You see, like everything else, though, we're starting to see that come into play. You know, it hasn't fully come into play yet. Yes, the U.S. is still in West Asia, but eventually Russia's going to take control of all those countries, right? Because the U.S. is just going to move everything into the Israeli state. They already said that they're not going to reopen those bases. Not to mention Saudi Arabia and Qatar want better relations with Iran because they happen to all be BRICS members now. You know, and Donald Trump is definitely, you know, trying to become a BRICS member, but he can't because, duh, you know, it's already in the books for Babylon the Great to fall. You see, you can't undo what's already destined. And like everything else, though, Babylon the Great has a final destination to come to naught, to pretty much be wiped off the face of the planet. That's whose civilization is going to be wiped off the face of the planet by the likes of which nobody has seen before. And yet, you've got this 4th of July coming up, and yet the talks of a false flag to get everybody dragged in, right? You know, they've been saying it time and time again that the Israeli state is who dragged America into the war. Well, you know, they say if you don't support the Israeli state, you don't support those Israelis, bad things happen. You know, like 9/11. I mean, you got that other guy, you know, that was the former prime minister there. Well, King Bibi was going through all the trials. You know, you got him, Bennett, I believe his name was Bennett. He was saying that, you know, pretty much it'd be like another 9/11 style, you know, type of tax if they didn't support the Israeli state. And that's just it, though, is things are ramping up. Things are speeding up for the elect's sake, right? A famine of the word is about to happen with this Bill C-9, you know. And we're the only group that's really getting into this Bill C-9, you know. Like everything else, though, you know. It's been pretty quiet in the news, right? Because, oh, well, that's just Canada. Well, we look at all the news. See, we're tuned in. We understand. We're not caught off guard by this. You know, we knew that it was going to happen and that it would be gradual, and eventually, yeah, he'd remove the prophets off the streets. And we see that. We also seen a little glimpse of it in 2020 because we were unable, most of us were unable to do street lessons because of the stay 6 feet apart or, you know, social distancing, so you couldn't be in crowds, you know, and all this bullshit, right? You know, which eventually we were able to set up camps as well, but a lot of us were just doing indoor lessons. But eventually the time's going to come where we ain't going to be able to do that, you see, because overseas, and you see all these things are happening overseas, but, you know, it's still gradually, because everything's going to come to a new world order. At the end of the day, the whole world is going to have to fall in line. So they'll have a one world government and a new world order, and pretty much they'll monitor everything. You already know that the Israelis control everything over here. That Mossad, are the ones that are spying, that have footprints, carbon footprints of everything, and they can tell your every move. They eventually want their tracking device inside, and any of those that fail to comply, well, they're going to put them to death. Yes. They are going to put people to death for not taking the mandated implants, the mark of the beast, which, like everything else, everyone else keeps changing their doctrine. Great Millstones never changed the doctrine, because we have the true doctrine, the true breakdown of what the implant is. It's an implant to be inserted in your hand or in your forehead. You already know that, that China's gone commercial with it before Neuralink did. But Neuralink wants to do it on the great miracles of what it could do. And you have a Jake actually bragging about getting it. That started at the beginning of this month. So yet we're at the end of June, and it's there, but, you got those that say, well, it's June, ain't no mark of the beast yet. He's been so bold, ain't no microchip. Yeah, it's out there. They just haven't mandated it yet. They still have to cause all, first you have to get rid of the currency, right? Well, you can see the breakdown of that. If the petrodollar, and there's no petrol being pumped, well, you see with the Strait closed, right, that there's no petrodollar because, that huge hegemony totally relied on the petro oil, but that's all been changed, Everything changed this year. So, like everything else, though, you're also going to see shortages. Now, they haven't run out of fuel yet, but just wait till after the 4th of July. Watch for false flag events as well, because again, this devil's coming down having great wrath, knowing they have to a short time. They know that their days are determined, and they know that, pretty much that, they're at their end, And Donald Trump, he watches a lot of the social media, right? You could catch him all the time, because he be watching and he actually be commentating on a lot of stuff. And he's just run out of lies, man. Pretty much, though, that you can tell that everything he says is complete bullshit, and that, it doesn't matter anyways because he was on his final term anyways. But you know as well as I do that they'll never, ever, impeach him because they tried to do that in the first term. And that's all a shit show anyways. Nobody really ever gets impeached. Nobody ever really is forced to step down unless they want it, like Watergate. But Trump has violated even worse than that. But he'll never be held accountable. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 2. I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they will fight, everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city and kingdom against kingdom. Yeah. A lot of shaking up is happening, right? Because, there's this division. And this division's getting even stronger, There are those that believe everything that Trump says, and they sound just like Fox News. And then you have those that are opposed to him, You got that divide, but then it gets even more better, right? Because at least with one thing, though, they know that Trump ain't in control. Yeah, Donald Trump can talk the big talk, but it's like, well, that depends on whether King Bibi tells him he can or can't. Like he talking about, ending the war in Iran, but no, King Bibi says the war ain't over and that they'll never pull out of Lebanon. So they already know that all they got is a puppet. People are beginning to realize that. The spirit of Egypt shall fall in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof. And what's that talking about? That the whole administration, everything's going to come crumbling down like a ton of bricks. They that seek to their idols and their charmers, man, people idolize this Donald Trump, man. They look at him as a savior. Some of them even pray to Donald Trump. Yeah, and like everything else, though, their king has failed them in every way possible. And the Egyptians I will give over to the hands of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over him, saith the Lord of hosts. So like everything else, though, this is Donald Trump is to everyone's detriment. They thought, oh, okay, well, we finally got a victory here. So like everything else, though, they thought that he was a victory. because he won the re-election in 2024. They threw you a curveball when Biden had won. So like everything else, well, everybody begged for Donald Trump. Did you miss me yet? No new wars. And they're finding out that that's exactly what they did, because King Bibi, once Donald Trump was in and Syria was completely destroyed at the end of Biden's term, guess what? He moved in for Iran, and he was able to attack Iran under the pretense of going after nuclear facilities. That's how the war got started last year. And, oh, well, we didn't quite destroy everything, Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon, so guess what? They bombed Iran again, the U.S. and the Israeli state, because the U.S. serves the Israeli state. You may as well call them the Israeli states of Babylon, because that's who runs Babylon. This thing's acting up. And the waters shall fall from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. What's that talking about? In other words, there ain't going to be any mirth here, right? Because like everything else, though, AI is taking over everything, right? You're talking to a robot when you just call for information. Yeah, 411, yeah, you're talking to AI. You're talking to a robot. You're not even talking to a real person anymore. They got AI to do all that now. So where are the jobs? Well, AI has them. And it's also draining all the water. See how it's talking about how it shall be dried up? Yeah, this AI data centers is drying up all the water. And the waters shall fall from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. So like everything else, though, these data centers that spy on everyone, these Mossad centers, you could call them. The paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. Yep. It's going to drain everything. So the economy, well, you already know that's been tanked. The fishers also shall mourn, and all they that cast angle into the brooks shall lament, and they that spread nets upon the waters shall languish. Pretty much, though, their economy is going to be destroyed. But they have a stable coin for that, right? A digital dollar. And you'll have to fall in line with their new world order. Moreover, they that work in fine flax, they will weave networks shall be confounded. They're going to be pretty much destroyed. So like everything else, though, there ain't going to be anything there. The Most High, this is verse 14, the Most High have mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggereth in his own vomit. So pretty much, though, the hurtful works are fulfilled, right? And, that's because the Most High is tired of Babylon and is about to destroy it. It's already been destroyed from within, right? Because we already know that Donald Trump ain't running everything, that King Bibi really runs everything, and King Bibi just happens to be a little higher up, but the ones that are really truly running everything, the bankers are the ones that are controlling all of it. They control Putin just as much as they control Trump. So we all know that it's a bankers' war, and their plan is to depopulate everyone. That's why that they made everybody take, they mandated that, C-19 every, vaccine worldwide. Trying not to say the buzzwords, but, pretty much though, at one time you couldn't even say that word. But, they mandated it worldwide, and a lot of people were forced to get it. How much more when the system is gone? Well, they won't even have to enforce it. When you think about it, a lot of people are willing to get it because it's going to be the only way to get their commodities, to get their commerce. Because you can see everybody has been brought to that universal basic income, and a lot of people that lost their jobs in 2020 never got any jobs afterward, Pretty much so, all that was gone. And a lot of mom and pop shops were closed. Corporations taking over, banks buying out banks, bank bail-ins, and pretty much so, stablecoin taking over. That's what they call it over here, but it's central bank digital currency. And they're eventually going to crush the dollar. You already know they got rid of the penny, They already got rid of the penny. They're going to get rid of all of that, very soon. But, sure, we sound like a broken record. Oh, it hasn't happened yet. It's June and it hasn't happened yet. Just wait and see, man. Again, the gradualism is picking up. Most High is speeding things up for the elect's sake. So like everything else, though, you know, that's why we go out here and we teach this thing diligently, because we know the Most High is going to send his son Yahweh Shai very soon. And he's going to destroy this place. That destroying wind is coming. And that's Yahweh Shai and the angels. And by way of them nuclear missiles. So, you know, we have, you know, our job to do. Our job is to go out and teach until we can't anymore. And this C9 bill is the beginning of the famine of the word. So get this while you still can, while we're still out here. So hopefully this has been edifying. For that, I want to say Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rekakadash, Wa Abba Babal. Brakathum, Jehovah Elect, Shalom.